All right, everybody, peace. Welcome to the Started by the NFL show, wherever or however you're listening. We're so grateful to have you here with us. As you guys know, I'm your host, Sean Cottle, and we are going to be covering some very interesting storylines today that popped out after week 2 of the NFL season. And it's a couple of storylines that I believe that people in the media industry aren't willing to talk about. But from my perspective, I believe they're big elephants in the room, and they're things that need to be addressed. And as often they do, they often involve the quarterback position, because the quarterback position is the most important position in all sports. So we'll be discussing whether a couple of AFC teams are having issues, having problems, if they are problems, because of the quarterback play. So we're going to be discussing all that and then some, guys. But before we get started, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well. So you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And thank you for all the love and support that you guys show us. And like my co-host Dre just said, he let it off for us. He said the Ravens will be fine. And, that's the question that we're going to be discussing today. And, Dre's going to be here to chime in, hopefully. But Dre and I were two people in the media industry that were high on Baltimore coming into the season, and I just want to address some things that I've noticed for Baltimore in the past two games, and that obviously the defense is phenomenal still, one of the best defenses in the league, led by Roquan Smith and Calvin Noy and Marlon Humphreys. They're a substantial defense, and the interesting stat yesterday against Vegas, they only allowed 27 yards rushing, and you would think, if you read that stat line, you would think, okay, well, the other team had to have won the game if they only allowed 27 yards rushing. To be fair, though, Vegas is not known for its exceptional rushing attack. Obviously, they have a great receiving core led by Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, and that's what they tend to lean towards. And so they held Vegas at 26 points. Baltimore did, and then the week before, they played pretty well defensively against Kansas City, except for a couple of key plays. And the issue, just like it has been for the past 10, 20 years, has never really been the defense for Baltimore, but can they be substantial? Can they be efficient on the offensive end? And if we look at the stats, so yesterday, Baltimore had 151 yards rushing, led by Derrick Henry, who had 84 yards, and Lamar Jackson had 45, and Justice Hill had 22 yards. And Lamar Jackson had 232 yards passing. So you look at the stats, you read the stat line, and think to yourself, okay, this is good enough to win the game. This is good enough to win. So then the question becomes, what's the issue? Why is Baltimore not able to squeak out these types of wins? And then you say, well, maybe it's the competition they're playing. And you look at Kansas City and you say, okay, well, Kansas City is the exception. Patrick Mahomes is starting to have the same impact on the NFL that Michael Jordan had on the NBA, to where you say there's a different level of standard. There's expectations are changed when you know that you're going up against the greatest player of all time. But with Vegas, you say to yourself, well, okay, listen to the team led by Gardner Minshew, who doesn't have great quarterback play, and you think you're playing against Vegas at home. This is a game that you win if you're Baltimore. And in relationships, we often ignore a lot of red flags, especially in the beginning of relationships, because we're either so infatuated with the other person, or we feel like this person is doing really extravagant and nice things for us, and so we get caught up in that honeymoon phase, and we're enraptured in all these different emotions, we start to ignore a lot of the red flags. And same things with quarterbacks. When quarterbacks first come into the league, they can exhibit these different traits and these explosive tendencies that make them stand out and really appear appealing, right? But then we ignore those red flags and we see that, okay, well, this person doesn't do this, or this person does that, or our partner might really be confrontational, or our partner might like to pick arguments, or our partner is really disrespectful. But we ignore those red flags in the beginning because we're so infatuated. And the same thing with the quarterback play. We get a quarterback and we say, well, this quarterback doesn't really do a good job of throwing outside the numbers. Well, that's the key thing of being a great quarterback. Or this quarterback doesn't really do a good job of throwing accurately in intermediate routes. Well, that's another key component of a great quarterback. We ignore a lot of those red flags because things look appealing, things look exquisite in the beginning. So we're willing to either completely ignore those red flags or just brush them to the side. But either way, same thing in relationships, same thing with evaluating the quarterback. We have to address those red flags, and we have to be cognizant of those red flags from the very beginning. And if these are things that we're not willing to deal with, and we know that these are things that don't make a great quarterback, then we have to address accordingly. And I believe with Lamar Jackson is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that Lamar Jackson is not a great quarterback, but there are some key factors and key traits that Lamar Jackson has never been particularly good at that we just continue to ignore. But I believe that also speaks to how great Lamar Jackson is. And the reason I'm saying that is because it just dawned upon me watching the game yesterday that there were moments in that game where I think of great quarterbacks that that Patrick Mahomes would have been able to do this, or Tom Brady would have been able to do this, or Drew Brees would have been able to do this, or Aaron Rodgers would have been able to do this. You start just thinking of great quarterbacks because Lamar Jackson's reached a point where that's the standard he's going to be measured at. And when your standard is higher, you're going to be critiqued more. But that's a sign of where you're at in your career, how great you are. If I didn't have high expectations for Lamar Jackson, then I would not be grading him to the standard that I do, like of a Patrick Mahomes or those all-time great quarterbacks. But because Lamar Jackson, is on that standard, I have to critique him accordingly. And so there are things that Lamar Jackson has never been particularly good at, like I said, throughout his career, that still he has shown the ability to not still be good at. So we can't be surprised when Baltimore loses a game like this. And what we have to start thinking, what we have to start asking ourselves is, there's two things. Does Lamar Jackson need a change of scenery, or is this the cap on how good Baltimore can be, led by Lamar Jackson? Because we've seen so many different iterations of this Baltimore defense and offense, quite frankly, which have both shown the talent and the capability of winning a Super Bowl, but obviously they do run into Kansas City. But if you're a great player, you're held to that standard to, okay, we have to find a way to beat this team. And those are two questions that come now from this. Does Lamar Jackson need a change of scenery? And is this as good as Baltimore can be led by Lamar Jackson? Because what was starting to happen is Baltimore starting to enter a phase where that championship window is not beginning to close, but the latch has been opened to where you can push it down. So it's open now. The latch is open, and whether it's going to get pushed down completely depends on how good, how transcendent Lamar Jackson can be this season. Because if the Ravens don't make it to the Super Bowl this year, there are going to be questions of whether this is the peak for Baltimore and Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying either way or the other when it comes to that question. But what I am saying is we have to stop ignoring signs and red flags of traits that quarterbacks don't have, despite how good and flashy and explosive they look. And I'm talking about all quarterbacks. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence, who we're going to be talking about in our next segment. That's another quarterback who, looks great, looks very appealing, but might have a couple of red flags that that could be the reason for why Jacksonville is playing the way they are. But I digress. But like I said, these are questions that would need to be had now. Is this as good as Baltimore can be? So moving forward, those are things that we need to be on the lookout for. But let me know what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear all about it. Like I said, in our next segment, we're going to be discussing another quarterback who perhaps might have fooled us coming into the start of his career. But be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you missed the first segment of our show, we discussed some things that are going on in Baltimore and whether there's cause for concern, and what are the issues for those quote unquote concerns going on in Baltimore. And in this next segment, guys, we're going to be discussing another quarterback who perhaps we should start questioning their validity. So let's go ahead and get into it, guys. So like I alluded to in the last segment, is it time to start questioning whether or not Trevor Lawrence is a bust? And the reason I had to address this question is because Trevor Lawrence was number 1 overall pick, and coming out of college, many said that he was the greatest college quarterback to play ever, and he's going to have an immediate impact on NFL. They said the same thing about Joe Burrow, though, and that's another quarterback who we might have to start, having some cause for concern for. But digress. And so Trevor Lawrence comes into his rookie season. And I don't believe the first season, but the second season they make the playoffs. Might have been his first season, but they make the playoffs one year, and they have a little bit of success. But these past 2 seasons, his numbers have gone down tremendously, or they have more so plateaued, I'll say. And no one's questioning whether Trevor Lawrence is playing up to the standard. No one's questioning it, and people are saying that, well, it's because the lack of talent, the lack of pieces that are around him in Jacksonville. But at that level, as number 1 overall pick, you have to be so transcendent that you make players look better than what they are. And Dre brought up a good example of this in our live show about 2 weeks ago, where he talked about how Aaron Rodgers was so good that he made a lot of players look better than what they really were. A lot of receivers, and when you're the number 1 overall pick, that's the standard to which you're held to. And despite the talent around you, you have to make players look better than what they are. And because Trevor Lawrence has not had that winning impact, has not had a positive winning impact on his team consistently since he's been in Jacksonville, going into, I believe, his fourth year now, people have to start questioning, well, okay, what's his cap? Or, is there another level that Trevor Lawrence can get to? And should we start questioning whether he's a bust? And if not now, then when? Because if 2 more years of this subpar play continues, when do those conversations start to begin to happen? And I'm not saying this with gusto or with excitement. I do believe Trevor Lawrence is talented. I believe that Trevor Lawrence can be a great player in the NFL, but I just have to speak on things for what they are. Based on what I've seen so far, Trevor Lawrence has not been a number one. He has been playing like a number one overall pick. And I understand that most players, almost all quarterbacks, when they're drafted number one, they're drafted into very difficult, very bad situations. But Jacksonville has pieces. They've got Travis Etienne, Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, and Luke Farrell. They've got pieces on the offensive side of the ball, and we know how deep. We already know how good their defense is, and so they've got capable pieces on the offensive side for Trevor Lawrence to play with, to work with, but we just have not seen that consistent level of play. And I believe this is another year where if we get another subpar year for Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, especially one in which they don't make the playoffs, now we start questioning whether or not Trevor Lawrence is a bust, or should we start calling him a bust? Because right now, where does Trevor Lawrence fall in terms of the ranking of quarterbacks in the NFL today? He's not better than that tier of the Herberts and the Burrows, and I don't think he's better than Dak. I don't think he's better than Jared Goff. I don't think he's better than Matt Stafford. I don't think he's better than Jordan Love right now. So you start going lower and lower to that tier, and then you start questioning, okay, well, the way New Orleans has been playing, and is he as good as Derek Carr? And I would say that's about where that tier is. Maybe that's about where Trevor Lawrence is, like wherever Derek Carr is about at. And that's being generous, but we have to start questioning whether there is cause for concern, and what's to be done. Trevor Lawrence isn't the guy in Jacksonville, then what's the alternative, right? And that's something that we speak about with another team that, ironically or coincidentally, we're going to be discussing in the next segment. So you have to be very careful when moving forward from quarterbacks, because once again, it's the hardest position to play in the NFL, which means it's the hardest to get right. It's just so hard to get that position right when picking. And players can look great, they can look phenomenal, they can look outstanding on film and in college, but it just doesn't always translate, and then sometimes you miss on guys. So we have to start questioning whether Trevor Lawrence is a bust, or is it just a bad situation? I don't believe it's a bad situation. I believe there are pieces in Jacksonville, but I believe Trevor Lawrence just has to play better. He just has to play better. And like I said, if he doesn't continue, or if he doesn't have an upward trend in his level of play this season, there are some questions that have to start ruminating in that Jacksonville front office. But leave your thoughts in the comment section. Is it too early to put that label on Trevor Lawrence, or have you seen enough and have your eyes told you what they see? So in our next segment, guys, like I said, we're going to be discussing another quarterback for an NFC team that gets a lot of flack, and we're going to discuss whether that's rightfully so or not. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed the second segment of our show, we discussed whether there's some cause for concern in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence and whether or not he should start being having questions surrounding him about whether or not he's a bust because he was the number one overall pick. And that's one thing I want to say because I didn't get to say that in the last segment that the only reason that label and that standard is placed upon him or could be placed upon him is because of where he was selected in the draft. If Trevor Lawrence was a third round or even a second round pick, I wouldn't be having this discussion, this conversation. But because he was a first round pick, not only a first round pick but a number one overall pick, that changes your standard, that changes your expectations. Same thing with Daniel Jones. Because Daniel Jones was selected in the first round, your standard, your expectations change. We wouldn't be having a lot of discussions about Daniel Jones if he was a third round pick, second round pick. You would think to yourself, okay, well, what else do what this is about what we expected from him. This is why we chose him in this round. But because he was a first round pick, speaking about Trevor Lawrence, because he's a first round pick, number one overall pick, it changes your standard and how you evaluate him. But in this segment, guys, we're going to be discussing Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys and whether or not Dak is the issue in Dallas. So as you guys know, yesterday the Cowboys lost at home to the Saints by a score of 44-19, which broke Dallas's 16-game home winning streak. New Orleans has scored, I believe, 96 points in its first two games, which is the most points it scored in its first two games since the 2009 season, which is when they won the Super Bowl. So now a lot of questions are coming into play about whether or not there's issues in Dallas and whether those issues are Dak Prescott. I tell you, the quarterback position is the hardest position to play because it doesn't matter if your team loses by 50 or loses by 2. You're going to be the question. You're going to be the issue. You're going to get a lot of the criticism. And I say that because watching the game yesterday, did Dak Prescott make mistakes? Yes, obviously had an interception. He had 2 interceptions. If I'm wrong about that, one of you guys can correct me. And he lost a fumble in the red zone. I understand that. I completely understand that. And looking at the film, it doesn't look good. And those are mistakes that Dak Prescott should not be making at this stage in his career. However, New Orleans jumped out to a very early lead on explosive plays. And it looked like busted coverage on the defensive end and lack of effort and tackling from Dallas. So, were there a multitude of issues for Dallas yesterday? Absolutely. But also, I do want to say this. New Orleans looks very good. New Orleans looks like a great team. A team that many people didn't expect to even win its division. A lot of people expected Tampa Bay, who also looks very good as well, with their win against Detroit yesterday. Once again, the team of Detroit, who many of us expect to be the best team in the NFC. Tampa Bay and New Orleans look very good in the NFC South right now. We got to start questioning whether New Orleans is perhaps a top 3 team in the NFC, maybe the best team in the NFC. That's another discussion for another show we'll have in the coming weeks, I'd imagine. And I say that to say this New Orleans team is much better than people have given credit for. And I say that because Dallas ran up against this great team in New Orleans. And, this wasn't the Commanders that Dallas lost to. This wasn't the Giants that the Cowboys lost to. And this was a legitimate team, a legitimate top 3 team in the NFC who was firing all cylinders. I mean, Alvin Kamara had 20 carries for 115 yards and 3 touchdowns to go along with 2 receptions for 65 yards and a touchdown. Jamal Williams had 8 carries for 39 yards. I mean, Chris Olave had 81 yards receiving. Rashid Shaheed had 96 yards receiving. I mean, listen, this is a great team. Great team, especially offensively, New Orleans. Dallas ran into a great team in New Orleans, and they did not play well defensively. Like I said, they gave a lot of big plays. They gave up 190 yards rushing. You're not going to win a game in the NFL giving up that many yards rushing. And we talked about before, the interior, that front 7, and Dallas does not do a great job of generating pressure like they did before. which puts a lot of pressure on the secondary, a secondary that does not look as good as they once did before in Dallas. So the defense is, I believe, is what the biggest issue was for Dallas yesterday. However, because a lot of people aren't sold on Dak Prescott and don't believe Dak Prescott should have gotten paid, they're going to start looking for reasons for why Dak Prescott should no longer be in Dallas and should not have gotten paid. And so they're going to look for this reason. They're going to use this as a reason and say, oh, well, look at this. Dallas lost by 30 almost to New Orleans. There's no way Dak should be the starting quarterback or should not be the guy. But Dak wasn't the issue. Dak was not the reason that Dallas lost. Poor defense was the reason that Dallas lost yesterday. Now, Dak didn't help with his play. I will give you that. But he was not the main reason that they lost. And once again, the question I always like to ask people is, if Dak's not the guy in Dallas, then what is your alternative? Who are you going to get? Because it's not coming from the draft. So it's going to have to be someone currently playing in the NFL. So if Dak's not your guy, who is your guy? Who can come into Dallas and make Dallas better than what they are now? And if there's no one that can do that, then you go all in. From my perspective, you commit to Dak. Because it's like I said in the last segment, it is so difficult to get the quarterback position right. It is so hard. Teams lose almost 2 decades of success based on one bad decision at the quarterback. And here you've got a guy that has consistently gotten Dallas into the playoffs. Do they win the playoffs? That's a whole different discussion. Consistently gotten Dallas into the playoffs and has led Dallas to multiple winning seasons since he's been the starting quarterback. So if Dak isn't your guy, please tell me who is. Who can Dallas get to supplement or even transcend what Dak has done? I don't think there is. I don't believe there is a guy that can do that. So you commit to Dak. Listen, Dak is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. No question about it. But also, like I said in the first segment, what's starting to happen is the same way Michael Jordan kept a lot of all-time greats, Reggie Miller, Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing. He kept a lot of great players from receiving or winning championships. Michael Jordan did. We're going to look back 20 years from now, and we're going to say, wow, this guy didn't get a ring. This guy didn't get a ring. This guy didn't get a ring. This guy didn't even make it to the Super Bowl. What happened? We're going to say, oh, wow, well, no, they just ran into Patrick Mahomes. That's the impact Patrick Mahomes is starting to have on the NFL. And we just got to be cognizant of that. We have to be aware of that when evaluating these players. But Dak was not the issue that Dallas lost to New Orleans yesterday. It was that very bad defense. If you're Jerry Jones, do you start questioning Mike McCarthy again? Now, Jerry Jones would never make a decision to fire a quarterback during the season. He would never do that. But I do believe Mike McCarthy could be on the hot seat. Seems like doesn't matter what's going on in Dallas. Someone's always on the hot seat, though. But Dak was not the issue for Dallas's loss. I just want to reiterate that. Dak was not the issue for Dallas's loss. But his level of play, or the way he played, did not help. But, a lot of the big media sites are going to try and say that, Dak is the issue and it's their cause for concern and should they, what's going on. Listen, New Orleans is just a great team, and Dallas's defense is not as good as we thought they were, and actually they might be a little worse, maybe worse than what we thought they were. But listen, Dak is not the issue though, and Dak is not the issue in Dallas at all. But let me know what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section. Is there cause for concern for Dak Prescott in Dallas? And if there is, I just want to know. I genuinely want to know, what's the alternative to Dak Prescott? And what I find is that I ask people that, and they can't give me a legitimate, real answer. And what that because then what you really start to get down to is, okay, If there is no alternative to Dak Prescott in the NFL, you have to go into the draft. But if you're going with the draft, you might as well just rebuild entirely, which means you got to completely blow up this team. And then you start questioning, okay, well, was the championship window closed? Was the championship window ever really open? I believe Dallas had a legitimate chance of winning a Super Bowl 2 years ago when they lost to San Francisco. Last year, I don't believe they did. They had a legitimate chance. And this year, I believe their chances are about the same as it was last year. So if you're okay with making the playoffs but not making it to the Super Bowl, that's fine. But what you see is that if you're not okay with that and you want to rebuild, you better get it right. You better get that quarterback position right, because a lot of teams, look at Washington, for example, look at New York, for example, just within your own division, they don't get it right and they're stuck below mediocrity for an extended period of time. So you gotta figure out what you really want in life when you make these decisions. Same thing in the NFL, same thing with football. But let me know what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section. But with that being said, guys, that's it for our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a wonderful show. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well, so you guys can stay updated on all latest content that I post daily. None of this is possible without you guys as fans, and Dre and I are just so grateful and honored for all the love and support that you guys show us. And if you like exclusive content, be sure to follow us on Patreon. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in Sorry to Bother You Show. That way you can get access to all of our exclusive content. We'll be back again, guys, tomorrow with our college football show. Continue to stay safe, be vigilant, make smart decisions, and until next time, guys, peace.